Hello, everybody. Welcome to April's Me for Matters. We're going to have that awkward 30 seconds that I always talk about while we wait for everybody to join. I hope everybody's having a good week so far and looking forward to the long bank holiday. Bav, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing very well. I'm looking forward to that long bank holiday, as you just said. Hopefully the sun stays with us.
Yeah, we hope it's freezing out. The only place you can socialise at the moment is outside, so we're hoping we see the sun a little bit. Isabel, thank you for joining from Diageo. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. This is my first Me for Matters session, and I'm really excited to be on board with an illustrious panel. So thanks for inviting me.
Brilliant, thank you. First of many. Once you're in the team now. That's it. We'll see you once a month. And Sneha, how are you? You good?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me. Like Izzy, it's also my first one, so really excited to be here.
Awesome, and all the way from sunny Leicester today as well. So
absolutely, representing the Midlands.
Absolutely. And Dougie, you've had a busy week, haven't you, with Brim? I think we'll hear a bit about that this week.
Yes, definitely. I'm looking forward to sharing that. I'm very excited to be here, my first time in this too. And I'm also very excited to be in our office at VCCP.
Awesome.
For a change. Brilliant.
Fantastic.
I thought a virtual background. I thought you were tricking us.
It's real. Often fall off, so it might crack me on the head.
We quite often have Roots from Thinkbox, and he always has. It always looks like he's got like the perfect virtual background, but no, he's at home. So no, I've been in the office as well. It's a good break from your front room or your spare room. So right, team, I think we've got a lot of people in now, so thanks for joining. So everybody will know this by now, but hopefully thank you for joining Me for Matters. I'm Liam from the Seven Stars, and I'm also a Me for Mentor, so thanks everyone for joining. So Media for All was set up in 2017 by the one and only, I think he's on in the audience today, Naren Patel, and our aim is to help recruit and retain people from Black, Asian and other minority ethnic communities to the ad industry. And I think that's why today is really important, because we're really branching out outside of, traditional agencies, outside of media owners and media partners into, that wider community of marketing people. So that's really important that we help recruit and retain people from different cultures, different backgrounds into the industry. We also really focus on how we can help people from rise. So we know that when people join our industry, they look up and they don't necessarily see people that look like them, which means the churn is much higher and people don't stick around, and we really, really need to make a difference. So since we last spoke, a month ago, it's been really interesting. Interesting might be the wrong word. It's probably been really bittersweet, right? So we've had the George Floyd murder trial, and of course, it was a really swift and obvious judgment. And, Derek Chauvin was totally guilty, and it probably should have taken even less than that. But the impact of that judgment is something I hope that we can all keep in our heads and in our minds. So he was the first police officer ever to be convicted of murdering a Black person in the USA, right? And when you think about it, in the last 5 years, looking at the stats, and I did a bit of digging, looking at stats, 150 Black men have been murdered by the police in the last 5 years. So the fact it's taken that long to drive that much change is absolutely frustrating, disappointing, so sad. But the fact that we're starting to see some change, hopefully, will really, really start to bring around the change that we need on both sides of the pond. I think, it'd be a bit of a miss for me not to mention the fact that within minutes before the verdict, that a police woman murdered another lady of colour just before that as well. So we still quite a way to go. Talking about bittersweet, last week was also Stephen Lawrence Day. So, growing up as a South London lad, minutes from Eltham, it was something that scared us. It was something that worried us. The fact that that whole investigation was completely tarnished by ineptitude from a group of people that probably, again, thinking about that institutional racism thing was a real problem. But again, when we think about the sentiment behind Stephen Lawrence Day, it's about how do we honour his legacy? How do we bring about, positivity from something that was quite pointless, something that didn't need to happen? How can we learn from it? How can we drive society in that growth? So I think when we think about today's Me for Matters, what we wanted to talk about was something that has probably, you don't think about it until you sit back, and has a really demonstrable impact on society, and that's advertising. So advertising really determines and defines how we show up. Who do we represent? Who do we talk to? What agents do we work with? How do we showcase people from colour in our advertising? There's so much that advertising does that can help represent a real you know, a real collective of society, and quite often that doesn't necessarily happen. And I think what we wanted to talk about today was how marketing and how the role of advertising can really, really drive that. So we've got a brilliant bunch of people here to talk about that today. I think yesterday was fantastic. We saw the launch of BRIM, which is about Black representation in marketing. And I know a few people on today's panel are going to talk about that a little bit. And I think we'll especially hear from Dougie about that a bit more. So we know people are moving in the right direction. We know that there's things that we need to improve and change. And I think we're going to get into a bit of that today in the chat. We talk about this every month. This is totally a safe space. We really encourage people to ask questions. You can do that anonymously. We know that sometimes changing things, you might get things wrong, you might use the wrong language. I certainly do that from time to time. We want this to be a safe space where people can ask questions and feel that they're open to be that authentic question, you know, and be themselves. So we know that sometimes that comes with challenge. So if people are triggered or need emotional support, we always partner with the brilliant NABs who have an advice line. And again, what we're going to do is drop that advice line in the chat, and we'll also drop the email. So if people need support, if people need help, not necessarily just about what we're talking about today, they can totally lean into that NAB space to do it. It's totally, I've talked for too long, as I always do, so I should probably introduce these awesome people that everyone can see in front of them. Lovely smiles. So firstly, we have Sneha. Hi, Sneha. You all right?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Fantastic, and thank you for joining. So Sneha has over 15 years marketing experience on both media owner and on the brand side, working for people like TUI, Virgin Trains, Channel 4, and currently she's at Dunelm, who are in our office actually, Sneha is a senior brand manager who looks after social and PR. She's also a founding member of the Dunelm Diversity and Inclusion Steering Group and is a brilliant MIFA role model. So thank you for joining. Joining Sneha is Isabel. So Isabel is, hi Isabel, how are you doing?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. I'm intrigued about your introduction. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to make it up actually. But Isabel is Global Media Director at Diageo. She's also founding member of the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, which is about understanding exactly what we're talking about today. So what's the role that advertisers can play in improving online environments and making them inclusive for all? I know that you're passionate about building a dynamic media team made up of a representation of what the UK is today. Again, today is not about talking about, you know, how do we make sure we want everyone to lean in and buy our brands. We need to make sure we're being representative of who we're representing. We've also got the brilliant Bav, who's been around. I think we're the 15-year crew, apart from...
We are the 15-year.
Apart from Dougie. Bav, you've been in the industry for about the same amount of time as I think.
It is indeed 15 years.
Awesome. Been at loads of different agencies, different senior media investment roles. And I guess working for Sky, we know Sky is one of the biggest UK advertisers, probably a bit like Diageo in terms of looking after all of their media. And I know, as well as being a MIFA mentor, you sit on the ISBA D&I Action Group and is a panel advisor within Sky as well. So I'm really excited to hear what Bav has to say. And finally, we have, I keep calling you Dougie, Julian, but I think I'm being a bit over familiar, but we have Dougie, who has two awesome hats he wears, which is Vice Chairman at VCCP, but also has recently been appointed the President at the IPA, which I think is a great move and, you know, is a real example of, you know, inclusion, representation at work. So I think he's been a real trailblazer. I've always admired what he's done and driving change in the ad industry. So thank you, mate, for joining us today. I'm nearly done, I promise. I feel like I just need to say to, you know, our audience, as we're going through, if you've got any questions, there's a Q&A box right down at the bottom. So we've got a brilliant panel today. Please take the advantage to ask some questions. We're going to get through some initial ones that we've already had sent through, but as we're going through, any questions you have, drop them in the box and we will get them as we go. So that's it from me. I'm going to start off with Sneha. And so like I say, thanks for joining. I know that, you know, as a mentor, but also as a senior marketing leader, what I'm really interested to understand is, you know, when you're thinking about creating improving work for Dunelm, whether it's social or the PR, how do you think about your responsibilities in terms of reflecting, you know, all of your customers and all your colleagues and making sure you are, you know, showing up in as diverse a way as possible?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And actually, it's something that we are talking about and kind of dealing with head on more and more, which I think is really great. You know, if I think about our last campaign, which was our autumn campaign we launched called Home We Get It, that whole campaign was rooted in insight from our customers. So whether that be through our social channels or through our community groups, it was all about kind of the little moments of joy, the little quirks that we all have about our home. Now, if you're going to base an entire marketing campaign around, you know, your customers' home truths, then, you know, you sure as hell need to be representing those customers. So actually, diversity and inclusion was completely integral to what we were trying to achieve with that campaign. And, you know, we worked really closely with the agency to deliver that. You know, it was factored in not just the casting, but also in the storytelling, you know, what stories were we going to represent? You know, we had to make sure that actually we were staying away from like stereotypes around, you know, gender, which you do get obviously in the homewares area, you know, gender, age, and then ethnicity, and that we weren't being tokenistic in our portrayals across the board as well. So yeah, very, very much a conscious effort. And I think what's really interesting as well is we were really prepared for that move, and we were really overt about it, which, you know, I'm really proud about. You know, we talked about it within the business itself from an internal colleague facing perspective. So, you know, I was actually asked to write an article for Inclusion and Diversity Week, and to talk about our new advertising. And, you know, I kind of went in there in like a really academic way and talked about why representation is so important, and, you know, fired a whole load of stats into this article. And then I thought, hang on a minute, like, actually, it's the personal stories that people resonate with. So, you know, I actually kind of scrapped that and I said, I grew up in, you know, the 80s and, you know, the early 90s. And, you know, in my family, and we lived in a big extended family, you know, the mere sight of a brown person on TV would cause someone to shout, look, Indian on TV, and everybody would like run from the respective corners of the house and, you know, stop and stare at this brown face that had like defied the odds, and it had ended up on our screens. And it's really interesting because when I shared that story, you know, it's quite a vulnerable thing to do. Like, people don't want to talk about race, or it's not that they don't want to talk about it. I think there's like an awkwardness when you talk about race. So, you know, I felt like, oh, I'm putting myself out on a limb here. And actually it completely resonated. We had colleagues from around the business going, completely agree with that. You know, that happened in our house. And it was really nice. There was so much support from like the senior leadership team, the exec team. And I think it was about the fact that, you know, we're having these conversations, and that's really important. And I think marketing and advertising, you know, it's our big brand awareness piece, and it absolutely acts as that catalyst to then feed those discussions within the business as well.
Do you know what? I love the way you talk about stories, because I think, you know, everybody here is more of a marketer than I am, right? But when we talk about stories, for me, that's what marketing and advertising is about. It's about telling compelling stories that gets people to lean in, believe, and take action on the back of that. And I think sometimes we underestimate the impact that those stories and that representation of people in an authentic way absolutely can create that passion moment. Like, there's nobody here like Bav, Isabel, Dougie, when he's creating work for VC people, they want people to have that lean in moment that they run to TV and go, that's me, I want that. And I love the fact that you think in that way. And I guess, and thank you for sharing that as well, because, you know, there are lots of communities out there that still don't have that. You know, we'll probably get onto it. We talk about some of the, you know, some of the work at the moment, and people are calling out, going, saying, well, it's easy to have a black person, a white person, it's a beautiful image of multicultural UK. And I think you shouldn't knock that. I think that is authentic in its own way, but what are the other groups we are not representing? And I guess, Isabel, when we think about, I guess, you know, you're partly responsible for that whole global marketing team at Diageo, right? It's a huge effort, must be thousands of people across the world. I know that certainly from my perspective for hospitality reopening, everyone at Park Royal must be a little bit happier, you know, in the last couple of weeks with the pubs and the bars and restaurants opening back up. How do you think about, when you think about who you're choosing to work with to tell those stories, how do you think about the partners you choose to work with? How do you think about, are we working with people who are representative? We talk about it. We don't want people just in a London bubble. That's a very small part of the population. What about the rest of the UK? How do you think about the partners? How do you make that choice?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you know, you say about the hospitality sector opening again. And yeah, it is great news. It looks like it's another gorgeous weekend in many parts of the country. So it's going to be a welcome boost to pubs, bars and restaurants. And I'm definitely going to do my bit and go and have a Tanqueray in the pub garden at some point this weekend to help businesses bounce back. And I am having quite a measured day today, actually, as a close team member of mine who went back home to India for a wedding is unfortunately very ill in hospital. So I say my message to everyone is, you know, stay safe, look after yourself and others. It's fantastic that hospitality is opening up again, but let's just look out for each other. And I think that's an overall message of inclusion and diversity anyway, looking out for each other. And so it feels like one that's very, very much on my mind today. And I suppose before talking about what you expect from partners, it has to start with you. It has to start with yourself. And I'm fortunate that I know firsthand what it's like to work for a company that lives and breathes inclusion and diversity, starting from the top with Ivan Menezes, Indian-born CEO. And he's made it very clear that there is no tolerance for racism, injustice, unequal treatment in any part of our organization or with the partners that we work with. And so that stems through our organization. And I'm going to get personal, like you know, like we just talked about here, that you could talk about our advertising and what impact it's had on that. But actually, I'm just going to talk about me and the impact that's had on me, because one of the most enjoyable parts of my job is meeting and exchanging ideas with people who I might not have met in any other walk of life normally. And one of my thought partners at Diageo is someone called Sridhar B, who's, again, born in India, lives here in the UK, and has a completely different viewpoint of the world from me. And that means he tackles challenges in a completely different way. And so whenever I've got something that I'm just not cracking, there is no better person to speak to than him. And I want to work with partners who take that same approach, that will have that well-rounded solution because they've considered other people's experiences and different viewpoints of the world. And so when we're advertising our brands, so, you know, the likes of Guinness, Johnny Walker, Smirnoff, we need to make sure that we are working with partners who will think about how, when we are advertising, we are bringing that well-rounded view of the world and helping shape a more tolerant society with our advertising dollars. The world we present in our advertising, and Liam, you said this up front, the world we present in advertising and where we invest our money, it has an enormous impact on how people think about the world, how people interact with each other, the inclusive environments we all create. So we as advertisers have a big role to play here. But I think the message, I'd say first and foremost, is it starts with us, and then it starts with how we operate with partners as well. And I could talk about this for quite some time, but I'll pause at that moment and see if you want to go to someone else or follow up.
I think that's awesome. And I think, you know, I like the way you talk about solving challenges, thinking about things in a different way, and bringing people together in order to solve those challenges is absolutely, you know, simply is critical to being able to move forward, because otherwise you'll only go in one direction because you're not considering all the opportunities around you, all the people around you. So it'd be good to understand, based on what you said, how does that play out when you're making a choice about who, you know, the teams you work with or the agencies you appoint? You know, is that like an absolute, you know, number one point, or is that in your list of criteria? How does that work?
Yeah, let me give you an example of how important this is to me and to Diageo. So many of you might know that last year we ran our global media agency review. So that was choosing the agency partner that we would work with across all of our markets globally. And PhD were the ultimate agency of record. And when we ran that media agency review, sorry, Liam, it culminated in a session where each agency presented to our marketing leadership exec. And the brief to the agencies focused on one big question only. And that was, how will you help us celebrate diversity in advertising and grow our business whilst shaping a tolerant society? So that was the question that we asked, and we got every agency to come back. And you see then it was about growth of our business, at the same time as having an impact with our dollars. And so to put it front and center in that big decision-making moment showed how important it was for us. And that's the kind of behavior shift I think is important to drive the change we need to make here.
Thanks, Isabel. And do you know what? I think, you know, we've had Dan Clays on, and, you know, he looks after OMG, and I know that the work that those guys are doing, as are people like WPP, is fantastic in moving the conversations forward. And I think the fact that we've heard from Sneha and yourself about where you put this on the agenda and how high, I think that's awesome. So thank you for giving a bit more colour around that. It's super helpful. But I think, you know, just coming to you as Sky, you know, one of the biggest UK advertisers, and I know you think about it as the whole ecosystem that you kind of play within. I'd really like to understand, you know, what do you see Sky's role in driving, you know, that broad and diverse representation? Or when you think about the audiences you're reaching, how do you make sure you're reaching all corners of society, and we're making sure that we've got media plans that do represent everyone, rather than, well, it's an ABC one, or it's the, you know, which we know target audiences like that were just a thing in the past, but people still use them. So tell us a bit about how you think about it when you're thinking about your media plans.
Yeah, sure. Look, it is a responsibility, right? And we've got to ensure that both internally and externally, through our advertising, it's representative of the consumers that we're trying to connect with. But as Isabel said, you know, that responsibility starts at home. It starts in our own house. And I think of sort of last year when we launched our sort of D&I initiative around 4 key areas. One around representation, progression, culture, and then using the power of our voice, the power of advertising. So I want to talk a bit more about representation and the power of our voice today. But if there is anyone watching today, an advertiser who might be at the start of their journey, who might be thinking about, you know, some STEM, please do contact me. I'm more than happy to share the entire plan with you. So, like, in terms of representation, I'm really proud of what we've set out to achieve quite publicly, and we've deliberately announced that by 2025 we want 20% of our Sky workforce to be from either a Black, Asian, or ethnic minority, of which 5% have to be Black, and that's pretty, you know, that's pretty bullshit going public with that. And I think that obviously that's a national target. It actually skews by region because we want to represent the local communities that we operate in and we work in. So, for example, in London, that target is much higher compared to Scotland, where there's obviously less ethnic minorities. What I'm really excited about, though, is as we progress in that, you know, I'll be working with really diverse marketing teams, diverse in their makeup, in their thinking. The ideas they generate, and ultimately that should lead to better innovation, to better work. So, and the actual target is not only for our main workforce, but it's also for our senior leadership. So again, I'm looking forward to, like what Isabel was saying, you know, where we have senior leaders at C-suite level who are from those underrepresented areas. So we're really excited, and the reason why it's public, I think it's even more important. And then in terms of using our voice, yes, look, we're one of UK's biggest advertisers. So we have a responsibility to ensure that our advertising is representative of the customers that we serve. Now, hopefully, a lot of you would have seen our Q Collector ads. Is a series of TV ads that we've had over the last sort of 6-7 months. I'm super proud of them. We've had 6 or 7 now, and it's, you know, they show really diverse families, diverse consumers. And as you said, Liam, at the start, it's been done in a really authentic way. And I think you know, not only is it important in front of the camera, but behind the camera as well. Because I think you can only deliver that authenticity if your scripts, your producers, your directors, your production teams are also representative, also diverse. So we've also got commitments in that area as well. So that's advertising. I'll sort of move on to media. Now, from a media perspective, I think the first thing that advertisers should be doing, I'm sure a lot of them are, is ensuring our media agencies also have a D&I plan. Now, we're lucky. We work with a media agency which is pretty hot on this stuff. And actually, it's run by a lot of really brilliant people who've done loads in terms of diversity for many years. But at the very least, it's understanding their D&I agenda, the makeup of the exec teams, you know, the account teams that sit underneath the account teams that work on your behalf. You know, you're trying to get that diverse thinking. So that's really important. And then in terms of media buying, look, our products are mass market. Our budgets are big, and therefore our campaigns are massive, and it's got national reach. So we know we're getting, you know, lots of sort of diverse audiences. Where we are making a conscious effort to improve on is our choice of media owners, especially around partnerships, which is a really big part of our media mix at the moment. We're entrusting media partners with our brand, using their tone of voice, using their platforms to reach their customers in, you know, in their way. It's important that we're challenging them, and we're increasingly doing that they're using sort of diverse talent, again, in front of the screen and sort of back of screen. And we're doing that at briefing stage as well now. So it's a real step change that we've sort of been a bit more reactive over the last year, but we're trying to be a bit more, you know, in a briefing stage doing that. And I think to Isabel's point again, from what she just said, you know, we are the biggest, we are one of the biggest, but it's not a race to the top. We've got to collectively sort of win in this area. There's so much to learn and to do. We've got to be humble. We've got to ask for help. We've got to work with trade bodies like ISBA, who are trying to try and really do so much in this area. Because I think, you know, speaking to peers who are actively trying to do the same thing as advertisers, you know, we've got momentum, but, you know, it'll be a tick box exercise if we just sort of stop. You know, we've got to drive that sort of level of consistency. So yeah, that's us.
Thanks, Bav. I like the fact that you've got to move, you know, and we've heard from everybody, it's like, how do you move it from a tick box to something that is just what we think about, and it's just how we do it, it's how we show up. And, you know, I'm really excited to hear from Dougie. Already I'm buying another subscription to Sky. Isabel sold me some Tanqueray, and definitely I'm getting more soft furnishings for my flat. I think advertising works, we know that. And I guess VCCP, awesome business. And, you know, your role, I guess, Dougie, what I'm really interested in hearing about is, you know, unfortunately, we live in a world where not everyone's ready for this, right? Not everyone's ready for true representation of showing how the UK really looks. People like to have quite a blinkered, polarised. Some people like to have maybe a more blinkered, polarised view. And I think we all remember the Sainsbury's backlash, and how you can have a backlash about a black person dancing on screen is still beyond me, if I'm brutally honest, you know. But how do you work with advertisers who you're trying to push, and maybe you're not trying to push, and maybe trying to help their desire to get to a more representative place, to show up in a way that's more authentic? How do you help them to, you know, think about the sorts of vitriol that we saw on social media? I mean, I'm pretty much off Twitter, right? But that kind of showing up of people who are going, why do that? I'm boycotting Sainsbury's and all of that. How do you help your clients manage that?
It's tough, you know, because it's upsetting to see, you know, on the individual human level, and it's uncomfortable to talk about. So the biggest thing is to, across all our, if I think at VCCP, is getting the people in this company better equipped to feel comfortable to have uncomfortable conversations. That's why events like this are so important. I mean, the Sainsbury's one was outrageous. The one that I lived through, because one of my accounts was Nationwide Building Society, you know, and the work we've been doing for them for 4 years now. Got a polarizing campaign, so people love it, so people don't love it so much. But what we also find, that company, that organisation is called Nationwide. Our campaign is about giving voices to everybody right across the UK. So that's literally a cross section of all people. When you see the comments that go underneath, that go out when the ads go out, depending who we put on screen, you can almost lose a bit of your faith in humanity.
Yeah.
Because we've shown pretty much every possible person in the UK group now over the years that campaign's run. And when we put a black man in the adverts, we know there'll be a load of toxic writing. And also when we have women telling jokes, you get an absolute spike every time. Now, luckily, that's an advertiser that's extremely progressive. Sarah Bennison, Paul Hibbs, the team there said, one, it's not going to change what we do, and two, we're not going to stand for it. So I think I'm a big believer, and it's quite right for them as a mutual because what they're based on, but I'm a big believer in us acting together to call things out. The response there was Together Against Hate. where a number of advertisers with Channel 4 took a stand on it. So I think coalitions are important. It then sets an example to less progressive advertisers. It says there's a line that we won't accept. I mean, Nationwide then close the accounts of people up saying, well, you can't be a member of an organisation if you've got.
Fantastic. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
So it's brilliant how they handled it, but that involves conversations at all levels of that organisation, you know, because there's a lot of brands and companies who just don't want to go there. So each company will have their own take and be at their own stage of the journey. I guess for us as an agency, we try to better equip people to have those conversations, to have the difficult conversation. They never get easy, but
no.
you can be better equipped, and you can educate people in the agency, the client organisations too. So yeah, that'll be my response on that front. Sad, you know, it's sad, but it continues. You know, I don't.
Yeah.
I see the footballers have all come off social media this week for the exact same reason, to go, you have to take collective action. So.
Yeah, do you know what we're talking about? And Dougie, thank you for being so honest and clear about that, because we're talking about mental health in May's Me for Matters, and the impact on people's mental health that things like social media and this constant vitriol and constant sniping at just representation of a fair and equal society should be the easiest thing in the world, right? And yet time and time again, we don't seem to move it forward. And I think you're quite right to bring up the Channel 4 piece, because one of our clients, Iceland, they jumped, and all of the supermarkets went, these people don't stand for us. We will jump up, and Channel 4 do, they're all running ads anyway. It costs no one any extra money. So everyone goes and says, this is, we're going to call it out, and this is shit, right? So I think people standing together is super important. And I guess, is that a bit what Brim's trying to do? Is that what that initiative is trying to deliver?
Exactly that. So Black Representation in Marketing, Brim, that came about, it launched yesterday. There's a big event on the 5th of May. But that came around exactly the same as a bunch of people, advertisers, platforms, media agencies, creative agencies. A load of us came together after George Floyd's murder last year, saying we want to do something. We feel a need from the people as individuals, and then for the people in those organisations, a need to do something. So we just set up a call. It was just a bunch of us. It was just who we could get into touch with and say, what can we do? And the whole thrust of what we're trying to do there is, there's no shortage of good intentions. I don't look across the industry in any way and feel we've got a problem on intent. But often it can be difficult to know where to start or what to do. And then my personal feeling was, I know from IPA or from NABS or Ad Association, lots of different forums that I'm involved in, there's lots of brilliant stuff out there, but it's in pockets, it's fragmented. So the decision that we made was to have a single issue, to go specifically, to make a meaningful change. We went, all diversity issues matter, but this specific organisation, this gathering, it's a coalition really, has said, to move the needle on Black representation, it needs to be a single focused issue. That was our belief. Because there's lots of studies that show if you do everything, even if everything goes up a little bit, you find that the proportionate difference on Black people is the least. So the specific issue that brought together advertisers, platforms, agencies, and we said, what can we do? And it's taken us about 9 months to try and pull together all the resources. Phase 1 is a framework, which is literally an aggregation of everything that's out there, everything that we can find out there. And if there's stuff that you know of that isn't in there, ping me an email and we'll stick it in there. Because the whole idea is of a one-stop shop you can go to improve different parts of your business, whether you're a tiny, small startup agency or a massive multinational. And we basically, a bit like Bav was saying that he's happy to share the journey done on at Sky. everybody involved in Brim is just sharing what they've got. So you can go in there and go, right, this is how you can write a casting brief that'll be more inclusive. This is how you can look at your recruitment policy. Is sharing best practice that we can find, so people, and it's all free. Yeah. And you can go on there and use it. It's a resource. It's a resource, really. I mean, in the future, the next stage, we want to use it as a platform for Black-owned businesses where you can go and find Black-owned businesses for different parts of the mix. And the focus, again, like Bav said, is in front of the camera and behind. So we're starting from best practices for what you should do in terms of the people who are in production, in front of the camera, people who are making the productions, best practices in the agencies, and then back in the market department. So it's the full length of it. And the plan over time is to get more and more people in.
Thanks, Dougie. And, you know, there's a couple of things you've said that I think all of our panelists have talked about already today, but I think I kind of put these two things together, right? Which is there a lack of intent in the industry that we work in to move this forward? There definitely isn't. How do you turn that intent into action is what we're talking about, right? How do you get all these people going, this is wrong, this isn't great? And Sarps has talked about the Sainsbury's backlash in the chat here, and Sarps is going, it's great to do an ad, but there's an ad anyway. Is it enough? It's, you know, how do you do more? How do you speak out? And I guess what you're talking about around making it a single issue problem is how you start to challenge it, right? So we look at the Super League thing. The Super League thing was reversed within 48 hours. Bojo's coming out of his newly carpeted. By the way, Dunelm should have been all over that furnishing thing. We'll talk about that later, Sneha. We'll talk about that later. But, you know, he came out and within 48 hours, it's sorted, right? How long has it taken to change that around racism football? It's still not, try not to swear, sorted. So for me, that's a really interesting piece. And I guess, Sneha, I have a bit of a question for you. I guess I like what Doug is saying about single issue makes it happen quicker, but we've got a really good question anonymously. I like it when we have anonymous questions because I think they're coming from a real place of, I just got a question, I want to know the answer, but people are sitting there, this person comes from a medium to small marketing team. How can they challenge their organisation to do more around D&I? How can they help make sure that they're showing up in the right way? I wonder if you've got learnings from the work you've been doing at Dunelm that you could just share with us, maybe 2 or 3 things that you're like, this is a good place to start, this is where you can move it forward.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question. And I think, you know, I really applaud somebody who is kind of starting off in their career and wanting to make this change. You know, I know 15 years ago, and sometimes I think about this, like, you know, I would not have had the confidence, and I didn't, to have a confidence in these rooms where we talk about advertising to say, actually, this doesn't feel representative. And, you know, and I'm from an ethnic minority background, and, you know, I remember having a conversation with the creative from one of our agencies about this very thing, about, you know, why did we not speak up? And I think it's great. And I really applaud people who want to do that. And I think there's a couple of things. You know, I work really closely with the inclusion and diversity senior manager from the wellbeing team, so within the people team. And I think that's a really, really fantastic place to start, because all organizations, well, all of the organizations I know, you know, they're taking this issue really seriously within, because it, you know, falls as part of a wider well-being remit usually. And I work really closely with her to make sure that actually we have initiatives for our colleagues, and then we have the initiatives from a marketing perspective. So, you know, she's been really doing some great things, and it was through her that we set up the D&I steering group. So suddenly now we've got representatives. So I'd say absolutely reach out to the people person, see if you can start a D&I steering group and actually talk to lots of people from around the business who want to be part of that, because like Isabel said, it's about having those people at the table, you know, to have that conversation. And I think that's a really, really great place to start. And I think from there, you know, we're developing colleague networks. So now suddenly you've got pockets of people who feel comfortable and passionate to talk about various things. And I think advertising is really interesting, right? Because it's where you have, you know, you've got significant amounts to spend. There's like a real clear process from, you know, the briefing to the creative sign off, various levels of people will sign off. And I think where there's a real, and so it should be, you know, it's out there in the public domain. And I think where there's a real opportunity is in your, business as usual marketing, like across social. Actually, are the influencers that we're working with, are they representative? And, are we talking about cultural events in a way that's not tokenistic? It's not enough to say Happy Ramadan and put a picture of fireworks up on social anymore. Like, let's start engaging with these things in a meaningful way. And by having these networks, you've got go-to people, because it can be daunting for marketing teams. They don't want to come across tokenistic. They don't want to say the wrong thing. You alluded to that at the beginning of this session. So I think we really need to support and empower the team. And just finally, one of the things that we're setting up, which I'm really excited about, is a diversity board. So this will be kind of made up from representatives from different, diverse groups, and anyone who wants to be part of it, really. And there'll be kind of a sounding board for any ideas, a sounding board to look over creative, but also, and really importantly, their colleagues within the business that are saying, yeah, we want to contribute to content. And, that's fantastic. So it's not a case of, well, we want to have a diverse mix, we don't know who to go to. I think having this diversity board will be a real game changer for us.
I like that, and I can definitely see, giving people a platform and allowing people to talk about how they're feeling or what they're thinking or how they would be, like you say, it's not just a picture of a fireworks and say that's it, we've ticked a box. It's like, how do people want that to be represented? How do they want it to be recognized? What do they need? And we did a piece, and 7 Stars, we're trying to be progressive, we're definitely not there yet, but even just educating our teams that if you've got somebody who's fasting at the moment, here's what you need to think about, and here's how you need to talk about them. And to sit down with managers of people who've never really had to necessarily think about that before, I feel like it's starting to educate. And I asked my son, I said, look, I said, the players before every game, they take the knee. Do you know what that's about? And he said, yeah, that's about, anti-racism. Bill, I said, yeah, but do you know what it's about? And I think it's that intent that Dougie's talked about. It's the collective issue that Bav, Isabel, Sneha, you've talked about, but then it's about the education piece that I think we need to keep moving forward. And I guess, Isabel, what would be really interesting is we've had a couple of questions around, I guess what we're talking about is tokenism, maybe, but I guess the question is a bit around quotas and people saying quotas. I think the question is from Lucy, actually. So it says, quotas, diversity quotas don't address the true roots of the issue. But how do you manage that? Well, you need to start somewhere. You need to start measuring things and holding people to account in terms of how you represent a broader, more diverse people. We've had someone go, oh, you've got the Indian guy in our ad, so we've ticked that box. How do you start to manage that? It's a bit of a minefield, isn't it, in terms of how do you make sure you're doing it right? How do you think about that, Diageo?
Yeah, I think generally to drive any sort of change, and change in this area included, it needs to be from the top down and then from the ground up. And I think this is no different. So whilst quotas aren't the perfect solution in any way, there is something so powerful about someone saying something out loud. If you commit to something out loud and you just say it to other people, it will happen. And in this space, we need change to happen. So I fully embrace the idea of having targets, because whilst they aren't perfect, we need to drive change, and that will make a difference, but that can't be the only thing that happens. And I think that's where it can be dangerous. So really focusing on this idea of the ground up of education, as we've all just talked about, is equally important in my view.
Yeah, and we all work for businesses, successful businesses who are, based on sort of targets. It's a sort of currency a lot of businesses will be used to. So actually having targets in place, it is debated a lot of the time, but actually it keeps you honest, and it keeps the target for the leadership to aspire to. And you're tracking against. And if you feel like it's not working, you divert, you try something new, but you just continue going on that journey.
And Bav, just thinking about that comment, is that how you're thinking about it at Sky, right? So when we think about some of the mistakes that people made in the aftermath of the George Floyd, when I think there was a groundswell of movement, and I hate to say that's the moment things started to change, because we can't say it was just because of that, but that was a moment in time. we realised that it's, you know, you have to empower and help everybody to get there. So what are the things that Sky are doing to really drive that education piece or to drive that understanding?
Yeah, and I mean, you were just talking about culture and Ramadan. I think it's a really good example because we had, even in our team meeting, someone stand up and talk about how, you know, the ritual and what they do and talk about the festival in terms of the wider group. And actually our leaders were talking to all the employees, say, be mindful, make sure you're not eating in front of them when, you know, just if they're on screen, because they might be, you know, really hungry, for example. So I think that's culture. You've got to embed that culture. But in terms of representation, I think the biggest challenge we're going to have collectively is there'll be people who are engaged in it because they live in it. They might be from underrepresented group. There'll be people who are genuinely passionate. They might be from a represented group, but they're completely passionate about it. Then you're going to have a large proportion of people who are not interested, but don't know how to make a difference or feel like they can make a difference. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have. And I think that's twofold. One, raising the awareness, and two, making sure everyone knows that they can make a difference, regardless of your colour. And at Sky, we're doing that in a number of ways. One's obviously culture, but I've talked about already. But in terms of recruitment, in terms of recruitment modules, in terms of external speakers, in terms of our leadership and how they approach weekly team meetings, it's all in our DNA, and it is that building that momentum, that consistency. But you know, you can create loads of resource, but you need to make sure people are sort of going to that right resource. I think I'll give an example of recruitment. There is a challenge around positive discrimination, right? And you want to make sure the best talent is being hired regardless of colour. But what we are actively trying to do is making sure, in terms of the pools in which we're getting people from, and therefore the shortlist organically becomes a lot more diverse. Yeah. And therefore organically you're naturally going to get better representation. That is the target, that is the aim. And there's loads of material that we're producing, loads of training and stuff, and having difficult conversations. Like, you know, Derek Joven last week, in that case, we used to have line managers who are struggling to maybe have conversations with their employees because they don't know how to talk. They're, you know, at risk of offending them. So actually, how do we train them to be, you know, to build that empathy, to be able to have that conversation? It doesn't come naturally to.
No, I mean, I think we're slightly losing Bav, but Bav, I think you're
back again.
But I hear your point about it doesn't come naturally, and then how do we give people the space to be able to get it wrong sometimes? And I think you can only do that by creating a culture where people feel free to ask the right questions, to speak up, and we just need to make sure we're not doing that, you know, whilst putting a disproportionate burden on people of colour, because that's what some companies did by mistake. They went, oh, tell us how you feel. It's like, these people are, I don't know whether grief is the right word, but people grieving and feeling open and really sore. And then there was a lot of disproportionate burden put on people to explain that to their white colleagues. Now, I think there's part of that, you know, that's a moment in time where that was, I'm not saying the burden was right, but the explanation and you know, we had people in our organisation talk about some of their experience, and people genuinely shocked, oh, I didn't think that, and that penny drop moment. And I guess, you know, what you've talked about is recruitment, and Dougie, it'd be good to understand from you. I think when I think about media for too long has been underpaid. You know, I'm talking about entry level, right? It's not, we've got people who work for one of our clients, their grad salary starting is 45 grand, right? I know that media and advertising isn't that number, right? For graduate starting salary. So straight away, you're putting up a hurdle, which is about, it's hard to get into unless you can afford to work there. Therefore, that's when intersectionality comes into it. And I guess what would be really interesting, Dougie, from your perspective, someone else asked a question here, I think it was anonymously, apologies if not, where they've gone, you know, a lot of incentivizing, find a friend. A lot of people go find people, you know, who are good. Is that stopping us from really driving that inclusivity and that broader reach of who we're bringing into the industry?
I've got two perspectives on this. First one is another plug from me. So the IPA, had a publication that came out in January or February called A Future of Fairness. And that's got a really good piece in there on recruitment and on a roadmap of how to tackle with a lot of these issues. So a good place to start would be there. But from a VCCP perspective now on recruitment, We had a brilliant session. It was about 3 years ago where we got our 10 biggest recruiters in and did upstairs in Green 6. And, you know, I sat down with them and said, right, how can we get more diverse shortlists in? It's the first time that they'd all been in the room together. It's quite an unusual session. It's a really good thing to do. And the thing that actually, everyone's sort of being nice and well-intentioned a bit. Then somebody actually said what the problem was, and that was a penny drop moment for me. They said, we put forward the people we know that you'll hire. So it's a shared responsibility on all the agencies to make this a priority and to act on it.
Yeah.
Recruiters are going, it's the sort of thing, you know, clients get the advertising they deserve, agencies get the talent they deserve. If you don't make this a priority and demand your recruiter brings you diverse candidate lists, and then you hire those people, it won't change. So I thought it was quite an interesting, you know, we have a rule, you can adopt the Rooney rule. So that happens here, where if we get a shortlist, it has to be gender balanced, and we have to have at least one candidate from a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background for any position. And if they go, we can't find anyone, we'll look again, or we'll get someone else to look for us. I mean, the interesting thing on referrals, though, just a final bit, and Rory Sutherland has a piece in his book that's quite interesting on this. He goes, if you get everyone in an agency to recommend one person, you probably won't, you'll get very monoculture. So that's why people say you shouldn't do it. But if you ask someone to give you 10 recommendations, you probably will get quite a diverse list, because otherwise they'll go with their safest, most like them if it's one. But if you get people to do a really long list of referrals, you get quite interesting. But anyway, it's just a bit of a side note. But I'd say, you know, demand more from your recruiters and act on it.
Yeah, I like that. And also, you know, I think about, you know, I'm in two minds whether to talk about this, but I'm going to, because it's bank holiday weekend, right? But somebody who we were trying to employ had gone through our website and went, you don't look like you're delivering on what you say you're doing. And you know what? I know that our racial, you know, pay gap is in a good place. I know that, you know, when we look at the 7 stars, where I think we're 19% versus an industry average of maybe 11 to 13. I'll get those numbers wrong. But then I look at London, and London 40, right? So we know that there's a big place to go. But then why don't we have something on our own website and that talks about, you know, some of our brilliant people of colour who are doing fantastic roles and why don't we have those guys speaking up and going, here's what I'm doing, but not just those guys, you know, broader group of people rather than here's 200 people and unfortunately only 20% of them are from Black, Asian, minority backgrounds. So I think it's how do we show up? Go on, Dougie.
I'd also add as well on recruitment, think who's doing the interviewing.
Yeah.
You know, because there's no point getting a diverse candidate shortlist and then they're all interviewed by people who look nothing like them.
Yeah.
Diverse people doing the interviewing as well.
Yeah. We've implemented that at Sky as well, diverse interviews.
Yeah, you know, I think hopefully I've got a question here, which is quite, I call it a relatively difficult question, but I'm going to have a bit of a talk about it. I think, Isabel, you might have a bit to add. It'd be interesting to know your thoughts. But Dougie, just in a sentence, answer me. We've had a question through on the Brim thing. Is it just explicitly for Black people, or is it all people from Black, Asian, minority ethnics? Would you just answer that for us?
It's at this time, it's for Black people.
Right. And I think that probably plays into what you were saying about choose a single issue problem, move that forward disproportionately, then we can think about how else. And I guess that's a bit like the sentiment of Black Lives Matter, right? Thank you for clearing that up. So we've had a question through, and I guess it's only fair to bring it to the table because we've talked about, you know, should advertisers stop spending their money on media owners, platforms, or places that are deemed, and I guess this is where maybe we find the answer to this, to promote misinformation and hate, right? So, you know, I love the sales team down at Twitter. I think the media product is fantastic. But when I look at it as a place to advertise, no, when I look at it as a place as a consumer, I look at it and I go, I don't love it there. I don't love it. And maybe I've got the wrong filter bubble and I'm not following enough of the happy people that I want to follow, but it doesn't feel to me like a place where I love. Equally, I can't just talk about social. I probably need to call out the Daily Mail and go, do I stand for what they're talking about? I don't. Have they got a great team? Have they got millions of people reading that product they have? So I guess you sit there, and when we're talking to our clients, you sit there and go, yeah, we have a responsibility. But if we're trying to reach a greater swathe of the UK population, can we afford to not be in some of those places? So I guess for me, it becomes about accountability. How do we make sure that Twitter, for example, has the right technology in place to stop that BS showing up? Question mark. I think that's a big problem. That's what the footballers are saying right now, right? That's why they're not on social. And it's not just Twitter, it's a number of platforms. And I guess it's probably the same when we think about Meghan and how some of the not just the tabloid press, the press full stop, talked about her experience and were really dismissive of it. And, so I guess it's a really interesting place because you kind of want to reach a broad sense of the population. And I don't think you can say, Paper X is just read by white middle class people. Why? Because we know that's not the case either. So I guess it's how do we start thinking about that? And I wonder, Isabel, it's a hot potato almost. So, but I'd be interested to know if you've got a view on it and the sort of thinking you're already doing around that space.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd say anyone who is passionate in this area, join the Global Alliance of Responsible Media, which I've been on since the start, because that's exactly why this alliance was set up, to drive change in this area. I think previously, let's say going back 2 years, really the conversation was that advertisers didn't have a big role to play in driving change, and it was the platforms that needed to focus on that. And then the big change has been that whilst it is of course the platform's responsibility to police their platforms, to clean them up, to make sure that they are representative of society today and inclusive and tolerant, advertisers need to make it easier for them to do that and need to be a powerful voice in terms of exactly what change we want to happen. And that's where GARM has come in, because again, what was very difficult for platforms is that they were hearing different things from different advertisers. We've joined up as one voice and said, these are the important areas that we want to see change in. And the number one area has been around hate speech, which is now being measured on an ongoing basis by all platforms. And we will be able to not only track progress, but identify, because that's a ginormous topic, and includes misinformation. We're able to track over time the progress being made within that and what specific actions need to take place. Now, of course, on top of that, every platform, every advertiser needs to make their own decisions about where they will and won't invest. But we have to bear in mind that as a whole, as an industry, we also need to play this role to drive us to have a much better, much more inclusive digital environment. And Diageo plays an active role in that, and many other advertisers do via the Global Alliance of Responsible Media. I've only just touched on some of the stuff that we're doing with them. So please do get in touch with me and I can point you in the right direction.
Brilliant. Thanks, Isabel. And do you know what? I feel like we could all talk about this for at least another hour. And I think, when I saw the announcement on Brim yesterday, I was like, it's absolutely awesome. I think hearing from Sneha about how Dunelm are tackling it and, your views on, how you make sure that the work you do gets out there, and Bav and Dougie, again, really, really interesting insight. And we really want these sessions to be, I never thought about that. Why don't I do that? Or how about that? Or this is what today's all about, really. And this is what every month's me for matters. So I guess with 1 minute to go, I should just say a huge thank you to the panelists. It was brilliant to have you guys here and representing advertisers, and Dougie representing your dual hats. And it's fantastic. So I hope everybody who's listening has an awesome bank holiday. We know that the last 12 months has been really difficult, and I don't know about anybody else, but I'm feeling pretty tired. So I'm hoping everyone can recharge over the long weekend and maybe keep off screens a bit. So thanks for joining us. May's going to be about mental health. We know that it's also a huge anniversary in the death of George Floyd. So we're going to have some brilliant panelists, and I really hope that you can all join us again then. So that's it from me. Thanks again to Isabel, Dougie, Bav and Sneha. It's been brilliant to have you, and we'll see you all soon. Take care, team. Have a good one. Bye-bye.